I'm Deanna Moffitt, and this is the What the Speak podcast.
What the Speak, episode 61. We got $1, we got $1, we got $1, hey, 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 hey.
Do you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch? If not, these expert discussions and insider tips can help you right now, today. Welcome to the What the Speak podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kelly.
Struggling with feeling comfortable in front of an audience when you present? Or maybe you're confident, but you have difficulty stumbling over filler words like and ah. Well, you can start kicking ass today by signing up for our weekly VIP updates. As a bonus, you'll also receive 11 free tips that will uncover 6 psychological secrets to public speaking, plus 5 tips on how to stop using filler words. Go to whatthespeak.com/VIP. Deanna Moffitt, are you ready to answer the question, what the speak?
I am so ready.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Deanna. I am really interested to talk with you about the whole idea of storytelling. But first, I want to let everybody know that you are the host of the wildly popular Story Sessions here in Chicago, as well as the Story Sessions podcast, which is very cool.
Thank
You're
you.
also the CEO and founder of, is it Luminant Leadership?
Luminant.
Luminant
Very
Leadership.
close. Yeah.
Which is a company that helps leaders motivate, inspire, lead through change in their organizations. And you do this by teaching them the art of storytelling. So that's all, not even to mention that you have a background as a facilitator, an actor, voiceover artist. You've done so many cool things, and I am so thrilled to talk with you. So thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Brian. I have to say that looking at your huge long list of already the guests that you've had so far, I feel so honored to be included in that list.
Well, thank you. We've had some really amazing people on here, and you, no doubt, are amazing yourself. So let's jump right into your story, Deanna. I would love to hear
Thanks.
when you get up and you talk in front of an audience. And I know you've got a lot of different venues that you stand before groups of people, but when you're speaking, what typically are the topics or the things that you're sharing when you get before an audience?
Well, outside of the performance aspect, if I'm doing a paid presentation, usually 2 realms. I'm either talking to them about storytelling, about how to connect to an audience using their own personal stories, or improv. How do you work improv into your personal life and into your business life? As an improviser for 14 years, I know there's lots of things in the improv world that you can take and actually really help both your leadership and your communication. But for me right now, what I'm really most interested in is storytelling. And I think because I'm seeing how it really kind of engages an audience immediately.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a key thing to be able to do, not only if you're obviously a professional speaker, but for anybody who has to get in front of a group and you've got to talk for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is, being able to leverage the art of storytelling is absolutely essential. So we'll dig into that just a minute, but I would love to find out from you, how did this all get started? Obviously, you've got a long history performing on the stage, improv. How did this come to be? Did you wake up one day and say, I want to be a performer, I want to stand before people?
Yeah.
How did it happen?
Well, I'll tell you what, I can remember back when I was in high school, and I must have been a sophomore, and we had this Vietnam vet come and speak to us who had been maimed, everything burned off. I think he was basically like no ears, his whole face burned off, no fingers. And he just was a motivational speaker. And I sat there riveted, and all my friends left. And I was still sitting in the auditorium after it was all over. And I knew I wanted to do that. And I was so sad because I knew I would have to be badly disfigured to be able to do it. I was like, how's that ever? I don't want that.
Yeah.
But I was really dreaming, like, can I just break a leg doing, skiing or something? And, the long story, I was an IT project manager for a number of years, and kind of always dabbling as a performer on the side. And a friend of mine, a lot of comedy, and a friend of mine said, oh, you need to go see this show called Comedy Sports. And this is back in Portland, Oregon. And I went and saw it and immediately fell in love because it was just a bunch of adults playing like kids on stage. And so I started taking classes. And the interesting thing, as through the classes, I realized that my career was kind of taking off in the same trajectory as I was continuing performing. My career also started to kind of escalate, and I became a senior project manager and acquisitions. And pretty soon I realized that my love for improv was increasing and my love for that job was decreasing. So I sold my home and quit my job and moved to Chicago to study improv. And I think that first year, I made $16,000. So I went from a very comfortable salary to making no money at all. And I could not have been happier. My life was just completely changed. And, with improv, the foundation of creation is just saying yes and to whatever is right in front of you. And so it teaches you to live in the moment and to react to what's right in front of you. And I think that also just, as doors opened, I just kept going through them. I just kept stepping through them. And then about 7 years ago, I was asked to work with a group of people to start a new show called This Much Is True, which is personal storytelling. So, and I was really intrigued by this. I'd been performing all over the place and had worked with Second City and did shows on cruise. I lived for a year and a half on cruise ships doing shows. And big audiences and small audiences. And that first storytelling show I did, and we literally read our own personal stories off of a piece of paper. And it was a story I lived through and I wrote. But as they were announcing me in this coffee shop filled with maybe 11 people, 10 of which I knew, I was standing offsite almost hyperventilating. I was so scared. And came out and told the story. And in about 10 seconds in, I breathed. And then I was hooked. And I realized that the power of the story, the power of not just a story, but a really personal story told really well can change lives. It changed me. So, yeah, go ahead.
That's pretty cool. I mean, to see the path that you've been on and kind of hear your recounting of all the different things that you've been involved in and how that's taking you to where you are today. My background, my story is kind of similar to where, I thought that I was going to spend my career as a performer and all the things that I'd learned through studying the art of performance, specifically as a vocal performer, getting on stage and entertaining people. I went a totally different path.
Yeah.
And all of the knowledge I acquired, all of those situations that I had been in as a performer played right into what it is that I do today and the things that I help people with. And just like yourself, storytelling is such a key, critical thing that a lot of us, we think we need to be artful storytellers. And there's some things that you should know, but really it's being a human being. And it's being able to be vulnerable and have some humor and all the things that make us people, and bringing that into that situation where you may be the focus of the attention for an audience, but just connecting one-on-one with those individuals sitting before you. And when you do that, such great things happen.
Oh, yeah. Can I share a story with you?
Yeah.
A couple years ago, I'm about to do an improv session with a bunch of IT leaders from a global company. So there's about 15 people in the room. And right before we kick off, the senior IT vice president of the company comes up to me, and he's a wonderful Norwegian man. And he said, "Do you mind if I speak to the group?" And I was like, "It's your dollars. Do whatever you want." And so he sat down and he started by saying this: I know how you feel about me, and I know you don't like me. I've read your 360-degree feedback. And the whole room just went, huh? And he went on and told this story about having to go to a business coach, and the business coach asking him one question after kind of hearing about his background. He asked him, why are you doing this? And he said, I didn't have an answer. And he had to kind of go through all of the things and reasons he was in his life to come up with an answer. And then he said, after this 3-day session, what I was teaching was the kickoff of a 3-day strategic session. I'm going to ask you, why are you doing this? That whole room just changed in an instant, just one moment. Let me say that one, in one moment. And I realized, all this leadership stuff that I'm training, all this storytelling, he just did it right there in front of me. And it was the best lesson. And after their strategic session, they were so nice. They sent me this wonderful glowing review about how the improv session was great. And I, in my head, I'm saying thank you. But in reality, it was everything. He set it all up with this fantastic story, which was very vulnerable and real. And as a leader, in that moment, you saw all 15 of those people were going to be lined up and ready to follow him right out the door. And that's great leadership, right? By
Absolutely.
being able to do that.
Yeah. And it's again, goes back to being like authentic.
Yeah.
And people may have a certain perception of you.
Mm-hmm.
There's the whole psychology, the neuroscience behind how we size people up subconsciously. But whether you work with somebody or you don't, if you can break through those barriers by exposing, or it's an interesting fact, vulnerable story, just like you said with this particular situation, like that changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
And especially as a leader, you're able to really then set the stage for here's where we're going and here's what we're going to do and accomplish together, and getting people to rally around a certain message or idea, follow you as that leader down that path. I mean, we can't say it enough. It's truly a powerful transformational experience when you're able to leverage stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Deanna, let's talk about some struggles that maybe you've had related specifically to the art of storytelling. As you were going through all of these experiences that you had with being a performer, and then now to the place where you are, where you're really focusing your expertise around being able to help people tell better stories. You yourself, what are some of the things that maybe you wrestled with to get to a place? And you may, of course, like all of us are still trying to refine and get better and get better. Would you be willing to share anything that's been difficult for you?
Well, I think I came into it pretty lucky because I'd had a lot of performing, and I had a writing background, a comedy writing background. So the actual creation and structure of a story, and I'm a voracious reader. Maybe that's not the right word. I should say that right before I said reader. I read a lot. And so when it comes to storytelling and performing, I think I've been, there's that great adage, I think it was Johnny, everything you learn. And you understand this too, because you have such a varied background, all of those things kind of just came together for me as a storyteller. But I'll tell you, as someone who teaches storytelling, not only private coaching for business folks, but I also teach at Second City here in Chicago. For me, I think I struggle when I hear a story that I don't connect to. And it's always about, I tell my students that I'm not just listening to your story, I'm feeling your story. And if I'm not feeling it, then something needs to be fixed. And it's often that the person who's telling the story isn't reliving the story. They're just telling the story.
Just kind of recounting the facts of what transpired.
And if you just recount the facts and you don't take me back to your emotional state of how you might have been feeling during all that, then I can't feel it with you. So then I'm just not as connected with the story as you would want me to be. Yeah, so that's probably the biggest struggle that I see when I'm coaching or teaching storytelling, is that people have these stories that they really want to share, but they just going there feels raw and vulnerable for them. So they think they can just tell you the story, but it's not a disservice. It's a bit of a disservice to do that.
Yeah, that's definitely understandable.
Yeah.
Well, do you find yourself in situations where maybe you're telling a story and like, do you feel like, are you nailing it every time because you just know this stuff inside and out?
No, good question. There's been times when I've told a story and the audience loves it. I mean, they are so into it. And then I'll go to another storytelling venue. Here in Chicago, there's probably a storytelling show every night of the week, and I'll go, oh, I'm going to just retell that story. And I think sometimes because you had that great experience in the past, you can do what I just said, just tell the story and not relive it. And all of a sudden you're sitting in front of an audience that's not giving you the same reaction as the one that was laughing or bending over, really enjoying everything. And then you start getting in your head about why aren't they laughing? This is supposed to be funny. And that you start getting ahead of where can I get into that? And then all of a sudden you've lost it because you're out of the story or I'm out of the story. So if I'm out of the story, they're definitely not going to be into it. So those moments when, especially as an improviser and someone who's in comedy world, when they're not reacting, as an improviser, you're a performer, but you're also a writer and you're a director. You're doing everything on stage because there's no script. So you're doing a lot of two-headed thinking in that sense of not just performing, but also analyzing what's going on sometimes. And that's a terrible space to be. You should really just be in the moment.
Yeah. And then again, that goes back to what we were saying about being a human, right?
Right. Yeah.
You can be a professional and get caught up in your head with execution and delivery and how am I setting this up and where's the laugh lines and all this stuff. When there's you want to do all that stuff beforehand, but in the moment you just want to be lay it all before the audience and be somebody that they're just enthralled with what it is that you're recounting or retelling or whatever it is. But that's the thing that really audiences connect with.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I always say, a lot of times people will think that, oh, I don't have any stories. Like I coach a lot of people who will often say that, oh, I don't have any stories, or I think I have 2 stories. And I will tell you, you have an infinite amount of stories. It's just recognizing what they are and how to shape them and tell them. But you certainly have more than 2 stories. You have way more than 2 stories. And finding those are the kind of the fun part of the coaching is finding out what are your stories.
Well, I know for myself, I'm very, I don't know, nostalgic, I guess. I'm the kind of guy that when I go through my old neighborhood when I was a kid where I grew up, like I got to go stop and see what's going on.
Yeah.
My wife's like, seriously, again, we've been down this road before. Like, come on. But I oftentimes will find myself where I'll be thinking about a past memory or, I grew up in this crazy Irish Italian family here in Chicago, and there's always some story, some memory, and I'll often find myself remembering those things. So I've got in Evernote, I keep a little notebook where I just log those things in when I remember something like, oh my gosh, this would be such a great lesson or something that maybe I think, it's in my psyche, it's subconscious, and I apply past lessons to current situations. But to be able to share that with an audience when I'm giving a presentation or, speaking, like that's the kind of stuff that having that mechanism to collect those and be like, you know what, I've got a lot of really cool things to share. And maybe it's not like this entire 30-minute story, but it's little nuggets, little gems that you can weave into the topic that's got some relevance, what you're trying to share with an audience.
Yeah, I love that, Brian. And that goes along with the idea that everything that you can experience and share with me becomes a metaphor for my life. So even though I didn't grow up in an Italian-Irish family, in Chicago as a man, you'll have experiences that if you share with me in a narrative or a story that I can relate to then my life to figure out, well, how would I act if I had those experiences? Would I have acted the same way? Curious. Yeah.
Well,
So, yeah.
and that's so key because what you're describing is essentially like know your audience
Mm-hmm.
and know that your audience is there to try and reflect on what are their experiences and
Yeah.
what you're sharing with them. How do their experiences mix with that? What are the things that they can walk away with from you telling that story or sharing that knowledge, that information? Because that's how we take action then. That's
Yeah.
how we're inspired.
Yeah.
That's how we get motivated by certain things.
Yeah, I think it's a struggle sometimes too with people because they think that they can tell the audience what they want them to get out of the story. And really, if they were just to tell the story, the audience will get what they need to out of it. You can never put the relationship between the story and the audience. Get out of the way, tell your story, and let the audience come to terms with what did that story mean for them. And if it's well told, it might be fairly universal.
Well, this is kind of an interesting thing because I know I personally teach people the whole idea of got to know your audience, where they're at, what their needs are, and thinking about what you shared in regards to when you've gone to different venues to do storytelling. And that, one thing that really struck a chord with one audience maybe didn't hit with another. Does that, when you're telling a story, is it kind of, it should always strike a chord with every audience because it's really rooted in the human element? Or do you need to really have an understanding of your audience because one thing may resonate with a certain group and not with another?
Well, yeah, I think that's kind of both. I have a couple of stories that are pretty funny, but also can be somewhat racy. They're not. I mean, I'm not George Carlin or anything with the F-bombs, but they're pretty innuendo-y. If I could say that. So I would never tell those stories in a all family audience. So knowing that going in. But I have a couple stories that I think are pretty universal that no matter where I tell them, even if it was a room full of, Frito-Lay truck drivers or a room of, kindergarten teachers that would...
I love the Frito-Lay truck driver example, by the way.
Very specific, right? There's comedy and specificity. Yeah. That, I think they would resonate with all those audiences. But certainly knowing going in who your audience is key for the most part. And also just kind of the setup. There's some story shows here in Chicago that are really intimate and everyone's packed in super tight and there's really no elbow room and it's kind of dark and you really get this feeling in there. And then there's others that are in a well-lit room and everyone's sitting up in chairs. It's very teacher, very student. And you're like, that's a different vibe, right? And so kind of you have to adjust a little bit.
Got to roll with it.
Yeah, I got to roll.
Yes, and.
Yes, and is right.
All right. So, Deanna, I want to ask you for, let's say I'm somebody, maybe I'm one of the folks in the audience today watching or listening to this podcast. And I'm like, this sounds great. Brian and Deanna have shared some great insights, but I don't know the first thing about how to tell a story. I've got a presentation next week, and what are some of the things that I could do right now to be able to craft a very simple story that would connect with my audience? Are there any quick, fast tips that you could share?
Yeah, I think one of the key things, especially if in a presentation, is know the point you want to make. I've heard people are banting around all the time, use stories. And I actually heard, I was at an event, I was hosting a big event, actually. I wasn't one of the speakers, but I was a host of this big, 4,000 person convention. So I got to hear 4 fabulous keynote speakers. And one of them was wonderful, told one story in an entire presentation, had no relation at all to what they spoke about. And it's the only thing I remember of their presentation. I can probably relate that story almost verbatim. Everything else they talked about, I have no idea what they said. So make sure that your story, make sure there's a point to your story. Like if there's something you want to address, find a story within your life. If it's a struggle that you want to you want to address, or if there's specific item regarding overcoming something, is there then a story in your life about how you overcame something? Or if there's something of how you want to recognize something, is there a time in your life when you recognize? Just so the first thing I would say, what's the overall point that you want to make with your story? Make sure it connects back to your presentation. And then when you talk about finding your story, I do a lot of things like I'll have my students or people I'm coaching, like I'll give them 2 minutes to list out all the firsts in their life. What are the first time they kissed, the first time they drove a car, the first time they made a cake, blah, blah, blah. And maybe I'll have them make a list of everything they've become in their life. So they've become a runner, they've become a husband, they've become a wife, they've become a parent, they've become a dog owner, and give them 2 minutes and go as much as you can. And then I might have them do some mind mapping on specific topics, like put something like over obstacles in the middle of your page, and then just kind of do offshoots of what are all the obstacles that you've had in your life. So that will help you come up with a topic. Once you've come up with a topic, the reality is we're all storytellers. Some of us are maybe naturally better at it than others, but we're human, so we're storytellers, and it's how we relate to each other. So once you have your topic, once you have your point and you have your topic, now it's time to start crafting the story. And a good story can be 1 sentence to 2 sentences long, or it can be an hour long. And at that same story, like, can you truncate this story down into what's the essence of this? And now start filling in the details to make it as large or small as you need. Like I always say, if you can get the who, what, where out of the way at the top so the audience doesn't have any questions in their heads, because if the audience has questions as to what you're saying, then they're out of the story. So if you can get kind of the basics of, it was summer 1985, and I was with Janice, and we were in my Toyota Corona cruising down the highway. That sets exactly what you need to know. And then I always say, make sure you stay on your story highway. So if you promise us something at the top of, like I have a story that says, I hate the suburbs. And I go into the story of I had a job that I had to drive out to the suburbs for, and without realizing it, I almost ran out of gas, and I didn't have my wallet. So I was driving around all over Oak Brook. You might be familiar with Oak Brook, looking for a gas station and not having my wallet. And I was panicked, and it was a super hot day, and all my windows were down, and it was so miserable. And thankfully, I was saved by this wonderful woman who saw my desperation when I finally found a gas station and pulled in, and she asked me, "Am I in trouble?" And it must have been written all over my face, and I said yes. And she gave me the last $7 in her wallet, so I get money. It's a much longer story, but that. That idea of promising I hate the suburbs and kind of describing that. And then, for me, I always kind of like to come back to, and on my way back, I came back to the city where there's 3 gas stations within a mile distance of my house. What happens to a lot of people when they're telling stories is they start with a story and then they go, oh, I need to tell you about this over here. And then they'll come back and then, oh, I need to tell you this over here. And our brains can't keep up with that. Okay. So just stay on your highway. It starts, go in the middle. You might want to go to a rest stop every once in a while, but a rest stop is just going to put you right back on the highway. And you don't stay very long over there. You just continue on to get to the end of it.
Awesome. Well, all great advice. I think, a lot of people have an idea of what a storyteller looks and sounds like. And maybe we think, well, we don't measure up to that. But as you pointed out, it's a very fundamental aspect of who we are. Our brains think in stories. Our brains gravitate towards stories. The fact that you have, that experience with the one speaker that told a story that didn't really relate to everything else they're talking about, but you remembered the story, is testament to that. And so,
can I tell you one more thing for that?
Yeah.
So one of the other speakers, who turns out to be now one of my favorite speakers, is Sal Khan. Do you know who he is?
I do.
From the Khan Academy.
Yep.
He came out And for 40 minutes, all he did was told a story. He told his story from beginning to end. And it might have been 3 slides. I mean, he was so unassuming. He was wearing a plaid shirt and khaki pants. No bells and whistles, just him on the stage telling a story. And this audience went nutballs for him. As soon as he was done, standing ovation, the only one of all 4 speakers, could not get enough of him. And all he did was told a story.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
Cool. All right, Deanna, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and wrap up with our rapid fire Q&A.
Great.
Are you working out right now or listening to this episode while driving? If so, I know you're not able to leave a rating and review in iTunes at the moment. However, next time you're in front of your computer or smartphone, could you be sure to do so? Just go to whatthespeak.com/audio or whatthespeak.com/video. Thanks so much for your support. So Deanna, let's close things out with our rapid fire Q&A.
Okay.
Really quick, the first thing that pops in your head to each of these questions, and then we'll move on. So first and foremost, when you give a presentation, you get up on stage, are you a slide or no slide kind of gal?
I would say no slides, but if they want slides, make them minimal. I mean, small. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So now we talked about this just a little bit, and maybe your answer is different. You mentioned Seth Kahn. Who out there right now is a speaker that you admire, and why is it that you admire them?
Yeah, I kind of blew my own thunder there. I'd say Sal.
Sal,
He
yeah.
really, yeah, it's Sal. Seth is his brother, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'd
Thinking
say,
Seth Godin is what I've got.
yeah, oh yeah, you were thinking of Seth Godin, sure. I was thinking of Seth Rogen, so there's my comedy world and yours. I think I love the art of someone just standing up on stage and telling a story and letting the audience get what they need to out of the presentation without any kind of, this is what I'm going to tell you and this is what you're going to get. That audience decided for themselves what they got out of it, and it was pretty incredible.
Cool. All right. So, and this should be a good one. What's the craziest, funniest, most bizarre, ridiculous thing that's ever happened to you when being on stage in front of an audience?
Oh, I mean, there's something that happens every class, or every session or every presentation that I do, for sure. I was doing some trainings for a third-party company, so I was being sent all over the country, working for this one organization and going into this one organization, and they had a wide range of topics that I was supposed to be presenting these full-day classes on. And I went into this one class, and I started teaching the class, and it was going great. And I was probably 3 hours into this 6-hour class when I realized I'd been teaching the wrong class the whole time. And no one in the class, like the class had materials, and I was presenting completely different materials, completely different slides. I had to use their slides. Nothing was matching anything they had. And I finally said, why didn't you guys say something? And they said, we were so enjoying what you were doing. We didn't care.
That's good.
Yeah. The organizer of the class was actually in the room, and I felt so terrible. She goes, Deanna, it was fine. She goes, you were doing great. We felt like we got 2 classes in one, but I was mortified.
Hilarious. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, for you, the ability to, get up and speak and share your message, share your knowledge, share your story, obviously has had an impact on what you do today. But I always love to, hear from the guests as to, your perspective. How big of an impact has that really been, to be able to leverage those natural talents, those abilities, the things that you've acquired, into what it is that you do now today for your career?
I think it's just changed my life. I mean, I think I could have been an IT project manager at a Fortune 1000 insurance company for the rest of my life. And I think taking that risk and moving cross country and not knowing what was going to happen and just saying yes to the opportunities completely change the trajectory of my life. And through that I really am very passionate about helping people. And I know that I see it, and I know you see it. There's a lot of people who need help. and I think that I have a wealth of skills because of this varied background that can really and speak to a lot of different kind of people that can really help them become better presenters, better speakers, better storytellers, better communicators. I actually once got a thank you note from a wife of one of my students saying that he was a doctor. This was at Duke University. He was an MBA student. I do a week-long program with MBA students, that he had completely changed how he was acting as a father and a husband because of the program. And that's, when you can do that, that's pretty amazing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, to wrap things up, what's one piece of advice that you would give somebody as they go out there and try to become a better communicator, and maybe even specifically leveraging the art of story?
I would say be yourself. Don't try to be anyone else, because no one can be you. So if you're busy trying to be somebody else, then there's no one being you. And it's a hard and scary place to be sometimes, to be that raw and vulnerable. But man, is it interesting.
Well said, Deanna. I want to let everybody know we're going to have the show notes, all the information to your websites, the podcast, all the great resources that you've got out there related to the art of storytelling. So be sure to check those out at whattospeak.com. And again, I sincerely thank you for sharing your time, story, all the great little nuggets of wisdom that you shared today. You are somebody who truly kicks ass when they speak, present, or pitch.
Thanks, Brian. It's been a pleasure.
All right. If you've never seen the story behind how and why the What to Speak podcast got started, visit whattospeak.com/speakbetter to watch the 90-second video. If you like what you see, send the link to someone you know.
All right, here we go with the outro.
Thanks so much for joining us today on What to Speak. Be sure to visit whattospeak.com for show notes on every episode and to sign up for our email list to stay updated on resources that'll help you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch.